welcome to the Witch's Portal. I'm here with Witch Wilde, also Wildness, and
Anastasia Baratta.
Anastasia Baratta. Well, sometimes we have our aliases, right?
It's
so
true.
Then we don't use this name for that work. And anyway, they've been on the podcast. We talked about all of the other work that you do in the world, the Pilates, the body movement, the BDSM. We had a really exciting conversation about that on the podcast. And then today we're going to talk about death work because it is Samhain, and we are talking about ancestors, and we're talking about this is the season of death. So I have been talking about them as a death doula, but I'm actually getting some education around the difference between what is a death doula and then what are all the different ways that someone can be doing death work. And so welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I would love for you, just to jump in. We can just jump into that conversation here.
Sure. Yeah. So Jamie and I were talking about how often people just think of like a doula in terms of like a helper, but we use sort of like death midwifery as this umbrella of many different ways that you can do the work. And doula would be generally seen as somebody who sits bedside, who perhaps just sits vigil or does some energy work, or perhaps, singing, chanting, praying perhaps, and also often maybe helping somebody talk through, maybe a kind of counsel, like a nearing death counsel around meaning in their life, or forgiveness, or letters they need to write, or things they need to take care of. And often this third party is really important because the family will try to do these things, and you know how it is with your family, right? Like, we love them and we like them to do certain things, but certain things we get really resistant around with our family or our loved ones. And then a third party coming in that doesn't have any agenda about your life is really, really important, because it can be a great advocate for either the person that's dying or the family to hospitals, and be a liaison between different ways, social work and things that they have to deal with. That again just really helps to ease at a time where energy is high, grief, anger, frustration, anxiety, overwhelm, all these things that happen when somebody's dying. And then you have this third party that's coming in with this knowledge and understanding. So that's a doula. And then some people would be like a financial doula kind of, or, so they might come in and help people get their finances together and figure out how to take care of their estate. Then there might be somebody who comes in and helps somebody understand, like, different advanced medical directives. I am doing death education, so I'm kind of a death intellectual, if you will. Mortality intellectual, and like Adrienne Marie Brown says, it's like an organic intellectual, where I haven't had a ton of, like, I'm not a theologian, I didn't go to some university. Of course, I've taken courses, and I took an amazing course through a Sacred Crossing, which is a midwifery course. And that's really when I started to understand that there was many ways to work in the death field, if you will.
Yeah.
What I thought I really wanted to do, and what I still want to do, is help people do home funerals and meaningful rituals at home. It's just that the home funerals are still very rare. And it's almost as though you have to convince people of it. It's really interesting. People get very like, oh, what will my family think if I want to stay at home for a day or 3 days? And that's what the education comes in. So that's where I've really become more of a death educator. It's sort of like I was sort of putting the cart before the horse, and I'm like, oh, right, the horse is the message, and the message comes through education and advocacy. And so, for example, we were at Hollywood Forever Cemetery all day yesterday, and we had a mock home funeral, but then we had a lot of death education materials, and people came up all day asking, what is this? What's going on? And then we say, we believe that like planning for your death is really important, and that there are all these different ways that you need to plan for your death, and also think about your death. because, you know, when you're dying is a very acute time to start thinking philosophically or logistically. You know, again, you're in your own overwhelm or denial or disbelief or disillusion or whatever happens to people when they get like a terminal diagnosis. And so we're here to just start helping people get prepared, and in preparing themselves, they give gifts to their family. And, you know, if we have a whole community of people that are prepared for death, then we just go into it, I think, you know, in a more mature and loving and compassionate way in all ways, rather than this frantic panic, anxiety, fear thing that we're having most of the time when someone's dying.
Yeah. And then people just like not even looking at it. That was some of the thoughts I'm having initially when you're talking about it is, well, so how do the people even find you? How do people even know? But then that leads to like every reason why you would be doing this death education now, because it's going to be the people now and the people that are educated now that as they grow up with this education or as they get older, they know, their friends know, their families know, as opposed to, I mean, really none of us really deal with it until it's happening. And then how is it happening? And then how would somebody even know that they could find a death doula or a death midwife and bring them into this situation?
Yeah.
And by that time, when you have all these people grasping for control and there's denial and all of that, none of these people are wanting to reach out and have anybody else involved. Obviously, everybody's different. There's different things that are going on. But I had a friend take his life a few years back, and it was like nobody knew what to do because there wasn't any family, and he had been distanced from like a number of different people in his life, and those were the people that were trying to figure out like what to do. But then there was like someone who was in charge, and she was so overwhelmed, like she couldn't do anything about it. And then ultimately here's this person, and they're sitting in a fridge for like 3 months plus or something like that.
I'm so sorry.
And it was really sad. And what we ended up doing to just heal all of that is we had, you know, a bunch of we had many rituals around it, and that just being part of all of that, I learned so much about how important all of that is. But there's so many different aspects, because there's the person that's going, and then there's all of the people that are affected by the person that's going. But it also seems like once you get to the point of death, in some ways it's too late for a lot of this.
That's what we're saying.
Yeah.
You know, that is definitely what we're saying. And also, I mean, you know, I'm really sorry about your friend's, you know, death. And, but also in some ways that he left you all with a gift and a message, to get your own shit together. And that you probably all learned a lot about, you know, like, you know, I mean, when somebody takes their own life, it's not that they're thinking, oh, you know, how do I keep this tidy for my family or something? But, you know, we're all going to die, even if it's not by our own hand. So, and we don't know when that's going to be. So that kind of messiness of not knowing where the body goes and how to handle it and all that sort of thing, if we're thinking about this prior, then, you know, again, it doesn't have to be stressful for the friends and family. There doesn't have to be this crazy long prolonged disposition of the body. And so yeah, it's interesting. It's definitely a zeitgeist, like, you know, kind of movement. You know, it's sort of like, I didn't realize how many people were in you know, doing this, and it feels almost like, you know, I guess I'm going to think mystically and astrologically here, but sometimes I feel like it's already, all of a sudden we get an alignment, and then a new kind of message or need comes through, and then all of a sudden people get a calling or a draw, or information starts to come through. And it really is this grassroots movement that seems to be moving very quickly. Now, I think COVID probably helped to kind of magnify the need, because, you know, there was just a lot of unnecessary isolation from the body. You know, most people, they died in a hospital alone because you couldn't be near them because they were intubated and full of COVID, even though hospital workers were, or maybe just one family member or something. But, you know, after they died, they could have been brought home for a home funeral. And that would have been very healing for people if they knew that that was possible.
Yeah.
And those of us that know that are even more like, we need to get this message out, that people, that these loved ones belong to us. They don't belong to the hospital. They don't belong to the state. They don't belong to the coroner. They don't belong, you know, to the funeral home. They're ours. And we need to take these rights back. Yeah, of course. No, can you keep the body for, well, you know, there are cultures that keep their loved one's body at home for 7 or 8 years. It's a culture in, I'm not even going to say because I can't remember the exact culture's name. But, you know, if you look up, you know, keeping your dead at home for 7 years, and they dress them and the bodies just dry out, and they like talk to them and they serve them. And then like when they can gather enough money for the ritual and the memorial, then they take them to the place of the ancestors, and then they leave the bodies there. So, I mean, really, you know, we could keep these bodies, you know, our government won't let us, but we could keep these bodies as long as we wanted based on our own values, our own culture, our own understanding, our own mysticism, whatever it is. But generally speaking, you know, what we've seen throughout sort of across culture is this 1 to 3 days. And having the body at home for 1 to 3 days can be incredibly healing for people because it gives you time to sit and talk. And that body, in my opinion, is still sentient to some degree. There's, you know, it's not, nothing in this world really happens just like lights out, right? The sun sets slowly, the moon rises slowly, you know, the earth turns slowly. Like this, just because the last breath has gone, there's still a sensitivity happening that then will sort of, you know, dissipate. So anyway, so home funerals are one of my personal, and it's also, we've talked, I think, about this in terms of its social justice, because, you know, like so many things in our culture, you know, even the mortality industry, especially the funerary industry, has been co-opted by capitalism. And so, you know, you go to a funeral home that's owned often by a corporation, rarely by, you know, a mom and pop shop like they used to be. And, you know, they're upselling you constantly, and they're playing on their grief. You know, oh, if you really, you know, there's this model, but if you really love them, you'll get them this $10,000 casket. And, you know, people go into crazy amounts of debt and even bankruptcy to, you know, to deal with their loved one. And, you know, you could do it for as little as $1,000 if you know what you're doing. You could take them home, you can do your own ceremony, and you can bring them to the crematorium yourself. You just have to have the right paperwork and know a few things in terms of legality. So anyway, that was a long tirade on that one.
Yeah, but that's interesting, because I would think just, it's a more real way of processing death, and it honors the person who's left, but it also honors you and what you might need. Like for me, when someone is passed and their body is dead, I don't want to look at the body. But that's also because it's got all kinds of weird fake makeup on it. They're all dressed up, you know, with the makeup and stuff to look like they're alive, but they're not alive, and they don't look like they're alive. And I don't want to see that. I think that I could come to terms, you know, and face reality and face the truth of something, and like look at the person that I loved and look at their real body. That of course we would still like take care of and make it, you know, the person look nice and have a ceremony in that way, and just
well, and there are beautiful ancient ways of you know, we just Queer Death Collective, which is something I'll talk about, that I do. We just had one of our collective members do herbs for death and dying, and one of them was the use of calendula to bathe the body, because it actually helps to tonify the skin so that it will like naturally kind of, you know, refresh. The other one is pomegranate. So for years they would use a little bit of pomegranate juice on the cheeks and the lips, just so, you know, they didn't maybe look as gaunt. But, you know, there wasn't this crazy trying to make them look alive. You know, it's just unnatural to try to make people that are dead look alive. It's kind of gruesome when you think about it.
Well,
and the embalming process is gruesome.
The person who's doing it doesn't even know the person beforehand.
Well, and I mean, apparently the way that the corporations go, you hand your loved one's body, it goes to a place where they disinfect it. Then they send it to a place where they embalm it. Then they send it to the place that like gets makeup and stuff. So it's like your loved one's body is just being handled by a bunch of strangers as though it was an object.
Yeah.
Like they, you know, I'm sure there are people that care, but how much can you care when you work in a body factory?
Well, you probably have to deal with it like an object so that it's not
affecting you all the time, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. And so, you know, and you know, I understand that like keeping a loved one at home is not for everybody.
Yeah.
So I'm not advocating this for everybody, but it is for anybody who wants it. And I know I'm the one of those people, like when both of my parents are still alive, but when they're, you know, they both know that I'm good, I want to do this, and they're accepting of that. And they're like, okay, yeah. And then they're like, well, how about if you do it in this room? And, you know, what are you going to put me in? You know, what am I going to wear? And I'm like, I'm going to make you look like you.
But also, well, the conversation also allows them to be part of that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And choose.
That's right.
So what are the rules as far as, so you have a loved one that they die in this room and then you want to keep them in here. How does that happen? Are you supposed to call and report this to someone?
It depends. So if they die suddenly and at a youngish age, you have to call the police, because, you know, otherwise it might look like you murdered them or whatever. They have to investigate if there was any, you know, crime that happened.
And do they have to take the body away to do that?
Sometimes. So if it is something strange and an autopsy has to happen, then yes. But you can still get your loved one's body back after an autopsy. You know, it's again, it's complicated. You need an advocate, you need somebody that knows what they're doing, or you need to have been educated yourself.
Yeah.
Because it's, you know, like everything in our government, it's like tons of bureaucracy, right? But it is possible. And but see, for example, you were here on hospice, right? And you were in your home and you died, then no, you just need the death certificate filed, and then you need to show that the body has been disposed at, you know, this date. Like no date is specified, but you just need to let the government know, okay, they were cremated, they're buried in this place, da 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 da. And again, you know, it's just our government's way of, I think it's a sanitation issue probably at the heart of it, so that people don't just throw bodies in garbage cans, or I don't know, throw them out to sea without some proper, you know, or bury them in improper graves or things like that. So, you know, I get that there's regulation on that. But yeah, and then there's some other paperwork that you know, you'd have to take care of, but it's not that extensive, and it's all easily found on the website for National Home Funeral Alliance. So there are, you know, that's the central place that I really like to send people, is the National Home Funeral Alliance, because the National Home Funeral Alliance has lots of legal information about how, because their advocacy is around community death care. It's really about taking back our participation in the death and in the after death care of our beloveds. So that's a great place that will help you. But yeah.
What other questions I have? So we were just kind of talking about the work that you've been doing all weekend, and so lots of like presentations. Are you looking for places to present this information? Do you guys have like little couple day course or like a packet of information that's available? Like, how is this?
Yeah, well, you know, it's all emerging. I mean, I've been a death intellectual for a while, but I'm just a newly trained midwife. So a lot of it, you know, it's been like a year. So and this is for me, you know, it was one of those things, you know, you get out of a training and you think, oh, I'm going to do this thing. And then it's like, you step back and you're like, wait, how do I do this thing? And so I work with two entities, one that I formed called Sacred Undertaking, which I'm just, you know, it's just my education, advocacy, and ministry. So, and that is for free at this point. You know, people, I'm just like a consultant, something people can call, ask questions. And if I don't know, I have a network of people to figure it out. And then I do Queer Death Collective, which is a collective of people that are queer and interested in death. And this week on Wednesday, we did an queer ancestor ritual, which was beautiful. It was a storytelling ritual, kind of around a virtual fire. And people came and really had some tender stories to share, and also some sad stories of disempowering deaths, you know, places where, again, this kind of death advocacy and education is important. You know, people who just lost control of what was happening with the dying process of a loved one, and then felt very dissatisfied with what happened. And then Thursday, we had Olivia Pepper doing Herbs for Death and Dying, also through Queer Death Collective, presented that, and that was really wonderful. And then this weekend at Dia de los Muertos at Hollywood Forever Cemetery was my entity Sacred Undertaking, which is my, you know, which I just said. So, and there we had information and also just resources where people can go for more information. Yeah. So, you know, National Home Funeral Alliance has put together this stuff so succinctly that I don't need to reinvent the wheel. I just need to keep directing people to them. And, you know, because they've just got everything pretty much that one could want in terms of information. And it's a lot. It's a big breadth of knowledge. So yeah, so that's, and I'm not exactly trying to promote myself. I'm just letting death be my guide. Yeah. And, you know, but you know, a lot's been happening without having to do too much. It feels like it's just kind of, I'm like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do. I see. Like, for example, Dia de los Muertos, I have a loved one at Hollywood Forever Cemetery, and for the last 6 years I did an altar for him. And for those of you who don't know, it's like a huge celebration at this really cool cemetery. Mm-hmm. And this year he whispered, and we can talk a little bit about the ancestors before we go, because that's a really, that's a big thing for me, he whispered, you know, make this about more than me this year. Mm-hmm. And so we had, like I said, like we had this mock funeral, home funeral, and then we had a bunch of information and books and things that people could look at. And, you know, we answered as many questions as we had information for. So that was really amazing. So
I think it's very cool. And the thing, you know, even just about like promoting your work is just you're a voice. That's like it. You're a voice.
It's not about me.
Yeah.
It's really like I'm really trying to take me out of it. I don't need to be some like death superstar. Yeah. You know, I just need to be in service of my teacher, death. Yeah. You know, and I'm just like, you know, and it's a work that needs to be humble. Like you can't get all me, I in this work, because it's like,
is that happening? You're seeing that?
Yeah, I'm seeing that with some people. Yeah, they want to be known as the whatever death something, you know. I always find it interesting when people have their own image in front of like a death work kind of thing. And I guess for doulas that's helpful, because maybe people identify with their sympathetic face or something like that. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. I mean, in general, I'm going less away from individualism and really into collective. I'm reading a lot of emergent strategy and really trying to look at horizontal leadership rather than hierarchical, patriarchal. And also, I think it's because my son is in the 8th house. When I would do those things and I was the lead head of it, I would often have a hangover, like after I had sort of this spotlight disease, and I would get kind of really uncomfortable. Like I'd feel sick for like a day after it. And so I realized as I started working with people and together with people, I had way less of that. And the more I get humble and take myself out of it, the more I can do the work, and I don't get those like spotlight hangovers.
It makes sense. So this is because the work needs to be done together, like with people.
Yeah, and I mean, and I think also it's just some of it's astrology. Like some people, like if your sun is in the 10th house, you need to be seen, you know, or in the 1st house, or, you know, if you got a stellium in the 1st house or the 10th house, okay, you know, you're meant to be seen in that way. but my sun is in the 8th house. Is in your house, Scorpio.
Yes.
It's like, I want to do this, but I want to do it like behind this curtain or something. You know?
Yeah. And also authentically.
And it keeps me more authentic, for sure. It does. Because then it's, you know, I can just check in. It's not about me. It's like, okay, great. And then what needs to be done? Great. Thanks, Death. Oh, you want me to do that now? Okay, cool. You know.
Well, so tell us how it started for you.
Well, my beloved that is in Hollywood Forever Cemetery, who died 7 years ago. And he was 37 and he had a brain tumor. That came very suddenly. He was very healthy. He never smoked, drank, exercised, you know, He had a lot of stress, but you know, these things, who knows where they come from. And so being with him and doulaing him to some degree, because we didn't even know what a doula was at that time. And, you know, I do energy work on him and whatnot. But again, I was his family member. And one of the things is that he was in deep denial. He really thought he was going to get better because, again, our medical industry is not always clear, and I don't know, they keep filling people with false hope at times. Maybe sometimes, I guess there are miracles, but he kept saying, you know, when I get better, blah, blah, blah. And then right after he died, his mother, you know, I'm not going to judge right now, but she called the funeral home 5 minutes after his death. And within an hour and a half, his body was gone and zipped up. And it just felt wrong, but I didn't know anything else. And then I started, you know, like, because I was grieving, I started getting into grieving and death. And then I found a death philosopher, Stephen Jenkinson. He started changing my philosophy around it. And then I read more things. And then I found Death Doula. I thought, oh my God, I wish we had a doula at the time. I wish we had people that had come in on this kind of a level. And then I just, you know, I decided, tarot card readers said, where's all this death? I was like, well, I'm thinking about doing death work. She's like, oh, hell yes. Like, that is your work in this world, you know. And again, sun in the 8th house. It's kind of like my you know, I maiden, mother, crone, whatever. I don't love that triad, but if you were to say sort of my maiden was sort of my sex work years as a dominatrix, sort of my mother were my work with the bodies and energy and doing the movement work, and now my crone work is the death work, you know, in terms of the sex, death, rebirth in the 8th house. So yeah, so I want my death to be different. I want to have more choices for my death than people even have right now. And certainly what my cousin understood. And my beloved was my cousin and my best friend. And yeah, so that was the genesis.
You need to mute someone. I'm really sorry about that.
Yeah, it was really hard, but you know, this is a great segue to Ancestors, because he is very alive in my life. He is very present in even very funny ways. So each year, like even just yesterday, each year I would do the altar at his niche, right? But this year we had to go out into the crowd. And I had kind of said that I'd like to be near him, but he put me in a spot directly across from him and right by the lake that I always sit when I come to visit him. Like, I always sit in this spot, and just randomly, that's where they put our altar. But he's like, not random. Like, I did that, you know, like I'm orchestrating things when I can. And in this realm, he's like, I have some pull. So, you know, he is, you know, I grieve him in the physical. Like, I wish he could put his arm around me and do things that we did, or call him on the phone, or go out to lunch or whatever. But he's with me all the time now, in a way. So it's not better, but it is supportive and helps me not feel alone or like he's gone. And it's one of those things, like, he will say things in my head and I know it's him because it's so his like quick humor, but it could not have come from me because I don't have that kind of quick humor. You know, like those kinds of ways of saying things don't occur to me And so I'm like, oh, that's him. Yeah, so I was telling you, I have a really like a very deep ancestor veneration practice that is also a part of my death work. Just kind of looking at death as a continuum, and honoring those that are gone, but not gone physically, but not gone. And in doing that, it reminds me that I live on as an ancestor.
Mm-hmm.
And that because I live on as an ancestor, I also have to check out what I'm doing here in this life. What is the leg,
Yes.
Yeah, because, there are going to be people that have, or entities that have questions about like why I conducted myself in such a way when I knew I was going to become an ancestor, it's like, and so it just keeps, when I think about my ancestors caring about me, I care about myself more. When I think about my ancestors hoping I'll heal, I want to heal more. When I hear and feel my ancestors tell me how much oregano to put in my, tomato sauce or whatever, I feel loved and not alone. And so it's this way of, sometimes in our world, it's hard to feel like you're loved and lovable and something to care about. But when you really have contact with your ancestors, you're like, because they're your grandparents. Mm-hmm. And your great-grandparents and your great, and they love you so much. And it's like, if you just let yourself feel their love, it's there. And the interesting thing, and just for your viewers, that's been really important for me, is that you have to call them in. Because unlike here, where your friend might want to give you unwanted advice or help, they don't get to do that. You have to ask for help and advice. They are like waiting for us to talk to them. And then the way that I've drawn them in more is through offerings. So every meal, the first bite goes of everything. I make like a little amuse-bouche kind of thing, where it's like a little mini meal of my meal. It's like the first bite of every plate. Well, at home, I have separate little plates that I put it, like little plates, and I put it up where their pictures are and things like that. Out in public, I usually just put a little off to the side. Because it's a way of giving back and saying thank you. And not only to my ancestors, but also to the plant ancestors and all of the people that, worked to put that food. It's also a mindfulness practice, but definitely they're like, ooh, yes, that's good. And I get excited. I'm like, oh, this is going to be so good. You're going to love this, and then I put the, it's really special for me. It might not be for everybody, but it's been really special for me.
Well, I think it is really special to know that your person, your people are still with you. And that's just another one of the things that, the church and religion have like taken from people. And so that they can be in control of your one life. And that, these are all the things that they have to say about it. Your ancestors are always there, but it's almost like you're tapping into the acknowledgement and the awareness that they do exist by calling them in and all of that.
I mean, if you go into indigenous cultures, I don't think there's anyone that doesn't have an ancestor practice or ancestor something.
Yeah.
Like I have not, I mean, if anybody knows of a culture that, outside of our own American sad cut off because of capitalism and et cetera, indigenous not having an ancestor practice, I don't think it exists. And that's just, again, it's a testament to like how real it is.
Yeah.
And how valuable it is. It's
when we do lose someone in the physical, that's when we learn, and that's when we start to learn. And oftentimes I think it does happen for people when it's someone that either they were really close to in the form of a grandparent, and someone that they're just so close to in the way that, because most people are kind of okay with their grandparents passing at some point because it's going to happen. But if a family member that's younger, or one of your parents when they were younger leaves, that's something that people have a really hard time, accepting. And so they hold on to that, and then they're wanting communication from that person, from that spirit all the time, wanting to connect with them, thinking about them all the time. It's not an easy thing to let go. Or with the grandparents, a little bit easier to like let it go and detach, and then they're gone, and then I have my memories. But and that's almost the gift. I think that when people go, many times it's when they're going to have the most profound effect. I think there's something different that gets to happen with people that are allowed to like live their whole life and go in old age, but people when they die young, there's such an impact that is made in the friend group, in the family. People are so affected by that, and then they really think about it. And it's the gift as well too. Like my friend that I was referring to, I do have a bunch of friends that have died young, but I learned so much from him. I learned so much from him contacting me after in all of the different ways and showing me, look at, these are all of your psychic abilities. You can hear me, you can see me. I can show you this. I can make a flower bloom outside. I can, he would show up in my dreams, which is all of these things started showing me pictures in my mind of something to go and find. But all of these things that I was like, well, I don't have that skill. I don't do that. But he was a magician and he was a Scorpio and into all of that. So it was like, as soon as he went, he was showing me all of this. Yeah, Pandro, you're not going outside.
Pandro, come have a conversation. Because cats are, they are often psychopomps for death.
Yeah.
They're often, they're liminal creatures that can help folks cross over or make contact.
And they
right,
can see.
Pandora?
They can see the spirits. They can see the energy. Yeah.
There are some schools of thought that believe that it's sort of like the first year they're kind of hanging around in a way that they were when they were alive. And actually that experience was true for me with Christoph is his name. He was very active that first year and very much like sitting next to me making jokes kind of thing, and then things went a little quiet. And that's, again, some of the philosophies or theories around this or things that have been channeled through mediums is that their spirit has to kind of go and do some work, make amends, look at their karma, heal, whatever it is that needs to happen, go on another journey. And then they often come back in this sort of 5 to 7 year mark-ish in a different form. And I very much feel like Christoph is now in an elevated form, very much in a kind of teacher role rather than like my buddy. And we still in our conversations, there's still a little, so he shows me he's still there, but the voice is, the level of wisdom and stuff is different than he had on this earth.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Because, well, it's there. It could be a bunch of different things, but in the way that you're saying, there's an elevation aspect to it. So whether there's, a part of him that is having another journey, and we're not all inside of our bodies anyway. So there's, this other part of us, which is like our higher self or whatever anyway.
Right, totally.
That is outside of our body for us to contact while we're in the body, but also that could also be what you end up continuing to contact. And then that is always growing and evolving. So we wanted to have this conversation at this time because of Samhain. And so, and when we're talking about Samhain and not Halloween, we're talking about another culture's practice of honoring the dead. And Halloween is just this kind of like, Americanized version of that, just like all the other, American celebrations. They don't really hold on to the traditions, and there's not a lot of why. There's like everybody celebrating, but there's not a lot of why, or even like, what is this all really about? And it's actually a time of honoring the dead, of honoring our ancestors, and honoring things that have passed, and honoring also that as far as like a whole. And
well, it is also because it's the equinox and it's liminal, it's between the equinox and the solstice. So it's that kind of liminal space, like Samhain and Beltane are both, kind of the opposite ends of that. So yeah, so it's that it's also the liminality of this time that actually lets us have more contact.
Yeah.
And that's why we honor them more, because we call their voices in stronger, right? We go, oh, we can hear you better. Okay, let's take time right now to hear you as deeply as we can, and to let you know that we're listening. And some of that's been lost too, you know, in terms of people's, but
so were you going to lead us in some sort of practice in you were talking about like a meditation that you had channeled.
All right, yeah, it's a short one, like a 5-minute kind of, like, if you don't know where to start with an ancestor practice, right, kind of thing.
So we went yesterday we did some meditating on our own death, and it's just it's interesting that, like, in this culture here in America, we don't talk about it. Something that we were talking about yesterday was that people don't even want to say dead, and they want to say also this very it's not necessarily a new age idea, but it's an idea in the new age, right, that like this energy doesn't die, it continues on. So then people even more so are not saying dead, and they're talking about passing on, or, you know, in whatever way they want. So I think that's awesome in the way that we're acknowledging that energy doesn't die, and that this is just it's a stage, and it's the body that dies, and we're like honoring and even grieving the particular life experience of that spirit, of that ancestor that you love. But we were talking with the woman that was facilitating it, and I was saying I actually feel really okay about dying. I'm not ready to die. There's all kinds of things I want to do, but as far as like, how do I feel and how does my body feel? I do feel like I'm at some sort of peace about that. And so in response to that, she was saying that she was, when she did that sort of meditation too, but then when she was saying to us, as far as guiding a meditation and saying to us, you are dead. How does it feel when you are dead? You are going to die. There was all this uncomfortable energy that came up, and almost like it was a bad thing to say that, and not wanting to let that energy out. So we got to experience some of that in that way, like personally. And then, yes, I think moving into talking about the ones that we've loved that have died, and then how we contact them or how we start with that practice, I think is perfect.
Cool.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah. Okay. So shall we begin?
Yes. So what would you like me to do, or anyone's watching? How would you like us to be?
I mean, as long as everybody can hear me, so just kind of getting into a comfortable place. It's going to be a short meditation, but you know, getting, you know, seated comfortably, feet on the ground, to ground yourself into the earth, into the elements, and then just close your eyes for a moment. And we'll go to the breath, just to bring the mind, the body, and the spirit together, and also to honor the element of air, as we acknowledge that it is the breath that separates us between life and death. And so feel the aliveness of your breath, and then allow your consciousness to come into your feet, and feel yourself connecting to the earth from which your body came from. Your soul, well, we don't fully know where the origins of that, but we know that the body is made of the elements of this earth. And so connecting to that. And allowing that earth energy to, you know, swirl around in your body. Feel the elements alive in your body. The earth, the water, the air, the fire. And then allow that energy to go up, out of the top of your head, and connect to the sun and the moon and the planets and the stars, our elders, and the ancestor dust, the star dust that we are also made of. And then come into your heart and feel that earth energy and that universal cosmic energy in your heart. And think for a moment about your own family. And start with the ones that are currently alive. And then of those family members, thinking about where they came from. Who were their parents? Maybe some of them are alive and some of them are past, dead. And then think of their parents, if you can. Most of us have a difficult time recalling beyond our own grandparents, but some of you may be lucky enough to know your great-grandparents. And we'll take away any judgment here of who they were in life, just remembering who they are. I know sometimes this work can be triggering for people because of family trauma and drama and disconnection. We try to step a little bit outside of that, just seeing them as souls. And then let's skip ahead, like 500 years. And so maybe you know where your people are from, your ancestry, your heritage, your nationalities. And if you do, then think about what those nationalities, those people were doing at that time. And if you're somebody who has been adopted and you don't know where your people come from, then just let this be an intuitive process. Because really, none of us know fully 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, who our ancestors were. Again, maybe a few have bloodlines that they can trace, but very few. And let your mind just go back as far as you want or as near as you want. And stay in your heart, stay in that feeling of the earth and the cosmos inside of you. The stardust that holds the information of millennia. And just see if any voices, faces, feelings, textures, sensations, images. And just breathe into that and make space for anything. It could be animal, it could be plant, it could be another life form, it could be a different dimension. Let yourself just sit there with this energy, or still in a place of allowing it to emerge. And for some, these things come quickly, and for some, it'll come in a dream. Another, you'll think about it 3 months from now. But trust me, if you start this process of inquiry through your heart, through your senses, through the elements, through this connection of earth and heaven, it will emerge for you. It will come. You'll know because you won't feel alone. You'll feel connected to something deeper, in a continuum, in a spiraling of time. So we're just going to stay here for a few more breaths. Seed planting, this beginning of the seeking, the path. having to be anywhere, have any answers. Trusting the process. Trusting that your loved ones will live on and do live on, and that you too will become an ancestor, that you too will live on, that you too are a part of this continuum. And let's come back into the heart and connect once again to the stars, and connect once again to the earth. And then connect it once again to the breath. Coming back into your body, coming back into the room. And whenever you feel like it, you can open your eyes and re-enter the room. And while I did this meditation, I held on to rosemary. And this is a wonderful herb. If anything didn't come and you want to stimulate it, it is the herb of remembrance. And so it actually helps your memory too, right? So you can smell rosemary and it helps your memory, like your real memory, your deep memory. So thank you.
Oh, thank you for that. This is really nice. Oh, you can have it. That was really, I went really deep in, that was really, really great. And the part where you're talking about like going back to your ancestors 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, without even knowing so much about the history and like where anyone was, is you can feel it, and you really detach from the physical aspect of even who you are right now. But you're trying to connect, so like there's this reaching aspect that's happening.
It's extending ourselves, right? It's like our energy, extending our energy out and asking is, hey, is somebody out there? Yeah, for sure. Somebody's out there.
And you're asking for the truth. So you're really ready to receive it is also
I love that
part of it. Yeah, where it was like, there was a container that was being held here, you know, like a container that was being held meanwhile the spirit like really traveled and reached. So that was beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, it was powerful. Thank you. So one of the things I need to do today is make an altar because I've been in the portal all weekend. There hasn't been time for it. So, you know, it might happen at the end when the music is playing. But I have photos, you know, from people.
And I brought you some marigolds.
Oh, lovely. That's right. You brought me all
I
of
brought
those.
You some marigolds. Oh. And, you know, that's an interesting thing, just as a last thing, is that part of the reason, so my understanding, that part of the reason that we make food and flower offerings, it is a way for our ancestors to bring their energy down and not feed off of us. So if we call them down without offering, then they kind of like, they have to connect into something. You have to plug into something.
Yeah.
And so the flowers are usually the best because their vibration is so high. And it feeds them essentially. And then they can feed off of that vibration rather than yours.
That's interesting.
And
well, thank you so much for coming and for sharing this. And the work
was lovely.
It's nice to see you. The work that you're doing, it's really it's interesting and it's really important. And I'm someone that wants to kind of have a bit of control isn't the right word, but you know, have a bit of like a layout or a plan for when I do go, so that it's not just part of this, you know, emotional confusion and everything for the other people. So regardless of how old I am when I go,
right,
and having all of that set up and being like, here's my plan, call this number, call this is what I want, this is how. I mean, and having those conversations is super great with people. I think after we had our interview, I was having conversations with my mom, and you know, just talking about all of it, talking about what everybody wants and what the people that may be living want, and then what the person who is dying wants. But rather than thinking about or not thinking about it and putting it over here, and it's this scary thing or morbid thing or dark thing, or that you're calling in your death by thinking about any of that.
Right.
The thing is, like, death is going to happen anyway. It's happening. It's part of the layout. And
I mean, and it's happening all around us, right? Leaves of your plant are dying, and insects are dying. I mean, it's constant, right? I mean, it's as present as life if we really are looking at
and really it's just layers of clothing, right? It's just like layers that are dropping, and then like we're and the energy incarnates this way or moves over here. And so I think doing these type of practices actually put us in a different mindset about all of it. And what a powerful way to go. I mean, everybody wants to plan their wedding. I mean, I don't. But everybody wants to plan their wedding. People want to plan their birthday party, and they want to like plan these things. Planning that, and it's just it's cool.
Yeah. Because I want mine to be super witchy.
Yeah.
Like super witchy. Like I want a witch's funeral, and I have to lay that out because, well, some of my witch friends know kind of that, but like, what does that mean? And the herbs I want. And one of the things Olivia Pepper was talking about is they used to pack, now myrrh is, one of those kind of not a sustainable thing, but they used to pack all the orifices with myrrh and things like beautiful things like that. And, some of it was, because there are scents that do come from the body as it's, but also just like, I don't know, the energetics of it. So, there's so many cool ancient practices. And I do encourage people to look in their own, again, ancestry as much as to find those ancient practices. Rather than a lot of people look towards cultures that aren't their own for things. I had a guy tell me what, he was a white guy, and he wanted this sort of, a ritual that seemed very culturally appropriate. I mean, I don't want to, whatever anybody needs, I'm not going to stop them, but I do encourage people, because there's some great, I mean, everybody's culture is rich with death practices. If you look deep enough, like even those of us that are from European and we think we're American and we don't have those. So we want to look towards, India and China and stuff. Right. But, like when I looked back at my ancestry, I found some very, very cool things about my, ancient ancestors and the practices they had. And I want to bring some of that stuff back in. I might have told you that because I'm Italian, and the Etruscans, they used to have orgies basically as funerals. Right on. Orgies as funerals. And the idea was that you get into this orgiastic state and you're in a liminal place, and they could help psychopump the
energy. Amazing. That's amazing.
Right? Okay. So anyway. So I encourage everybody to check out. I'm sure you'll find something equally as cool. Maybe not as sexy, but cool. Anyway, well, thank you, Jaime. And thank you, whoever's out there, for listening. And hopefully this was valuable to somebody.
Absolutely.